coming from Soweto, Alexandra, and Orange Farm to be specific.
That's the purpose really of introducing this debate and of the partnership between SAFERWORLD and the Action Support Center, is to try and see if we can create a microcosm, if you like, of what's happening at the global level. Because post-2015 is really an opportunity for us to rethink the idea of partnerships. Partnerships between the North and the South.
So what we're calling for is a people-driven agenda that relates to development, peace and security, and addressing most of the challenges that we're facing as Africans.
Ultimately, one of the main contributing factors to conflict in Africa revolves around the nature of the state and the allocation of resources, whether they are public goods in the form of healthcare, education, or they're in the form of natural resources or receipts from natural resources like oil or diamonds.
We have a violence that is taking place now that happened in December between the party official from SPLM leaders. That is spark of violence that is spread to states, to about 3 states in South Sudan. So the government is grappling with that, and the regional organization, again like EGAD, is convening a peace talk in Addis that bring the rebel groups and the government on the table. In January, they signed a cessation of hostility, but unfortunately, it's not like the two sides.
The major failure of the Somali peace process, or maybe state building process, should be bad leadership. And that is where the Somalis failed originally, and still they are failing on that same issue.
The MDGs, remembering that it stands for Millennium Development Goals, and trying to remember what real difference that's made in our lives.
In the previous development agenda, the issues of conflict, peace and security were not more elaborate. There are no indicators, to be more specific, that measure how far have we gone, how far have we delivered in making sure or in ensuring that our societies are at peace, there is security, and conflict is minimal.
The Millennium Development Goal did not work in South Sudan. Like, it faced a lot of challenges. We have the worst development indicators in the world.
To what extent can you evaluate the extent to which conflict has affected the achievement of those MDGs? Where have there been successes on the continent as well?
The overall picture that you get from UNDP and the World Bank and others who look at this on a macro level is that there are serious implications for achieving MDGs in countries which are experiencing violence and conflict.
Remember, there is a framework, an African framework to combat peace and security, to deal with peace and security on the continent. And that framework is really being driven. The process today is the framework being implemented by the African Union. And that process is a highly political process that encompasses the entire rethinking how we approach peace and security on the continent. But also, how do we make sure that mediation efforts are being effective to prevent conflict, but also to manage conflict when conflict erupts.
Whether it is African Union, whether it's IGAD, whether the United Nations and other international donors, they are all really ready to help Somalia now.
Yeah, all African Union, EGAD, they help us gain our independence. They gave us considerable support, and in 2011 we gained our independence. So this international organization and regional organization have been supporting South Sudan in its developmental challenges.
We also do a lot of things, but remember our role is always to support what the African Union is doing. And in Mali and Central African Republic, what we're doing is providing technical support, policy input, giving our support to the African Union in the mediation effort, but also the entire thinking about how to end conflict on the continent.
While it's good for people to share and to air their views on where the problems lie, they need to go beyond that, and they need to also start to look at what role they can play
in coming up with solutions?
Absolutely, there is an international effort to help Somalia, and particularly an African Union. They are really leading the process. However, all those organizations are outsiders. And I think if the Somalia problem has to be solved, the real solutions should come not from outside, but from within. The Somalis should take the lead. Somalis should own the process.
Yeah, the forum will help very much because underdevelopment is one of the drivers of conflict in South Sudan. When we were fighting our 21 year that ended in 2005, underdevelopment was a big issue because people in the south were blaming people in the north of not providing development in the south.
The idea is to try and get people's opinions, to get the views of people from the communities that are affected by conflict, and then to include those views in the discussions that are going on within the African Union and within the United Nations.
Do you not think that including peace and security as an element in post-2015 agenda would be complicating the matter a lot more? My understanding of the MDGs is that they targeted sort of issues that, reducing poverty by sort of like targeting sort of specific activities. When you start adding the issue of promoting sustainable peace and development, good governance, democracy, those are much bigger issues that you're basically asking for world peace. And in that framework, then how do you then try to achieve that macro goal?
I think it's a very good question, but I also think that it's not really setting out to achieve world peace. I think that states that feel that it's going to be hard to make progress on these issues can use this as an opportunity to demonstrate progress, even from a low baseline. But the overwhelming evidence is that achieving the MDGs, despite those targets, has been impossible in states that are suffering from chronic conflict and instability. And so, if now there's an opportunity to reflect on that, and I think what will make it more possible? The evidence also points to actually, it's the state-society relationship, it's governance, it's those things that are undermining the achievement of the MDG.
You see, I think it's true that people have got a lot to complain about. It's true that people are frustrated. It's true that people have not been given the things that they were promised. So you can understand why people get a little bit cynical, why people look for people to blame. And I think there's some truth in the story that people are telling, but I don't think it's the whole truth. I think there are also lots of examples of where progress has been made, where things are better now than they were 25 years ago.
We now said we have less conflict on the continent, contrary to what people think, because of the efforts, mediation effort, but also prevention effort that are being made. We have supported the Somali transition government by sending them expert technical support in the office of the Prime Minister at that time to implement the transition roadmap. And it was one of the success stories. Remember, after the peace agreement, there was a Prime Minister that was designated to lead the transition period. And there was a roadmap that was developed. And that roadmap was implemented successfully. It led to elections, and now, of course, you have a government in place.
Historically, Somalia used to have one of the best states in sub-Saharan Africa, very stable, good. Colonialism was not an issue, but in the absence of good leadership, then colonialism became a factor. And the role of the international community should be just to help the Somalis really to realize their ambitions.
You see, I think if you look at Africa now compared to whatever the time frame is, 10 years, 20 years ago, you can see that there's a lot less armed conflict on the continent now than there was before. We hear a lot of media stories about Sudan, South Sudan, Central African Republic, the DRC, but we don't hear about places like Sierra Leone, Liberia, where elections are being held, where power is changing hands, where people are seeing the differences between political parties not as a reason to go back to the bush, but to sit down and talk about what the differences are. The indicators are telling us that things are improving, but not quickly enough.
What needs to be done has to be done by the continental body, and I think it's where civil society inclusion in these processes is quite relevant and important. If we play our role as civil society, as we look ourselves, because think tanks are also part of a civil society movement, and our role is to make sure that we are there to support organizations that have the key mandates to work on different issues.
Our intention, rather, is that we influence peace and security as issues that will form part of the 2015 post-development agenda.
What we now need to do is to seriously look at what have been the constraints, and one of them is actually the impediments that peace and security, or the lack of peace and security, have had on development. So how do we incorporate that now in an agenda going forward?
In order for Africa to be developed, there is a strong need for peace and security.